In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. A theater for endless slaughter, dread, and terror, where the primordial soup of creation has aged and withered into a putrescent miasma, an endless revolution of death and rebirth. Where once life fed on death, the cycle has been reversed, maybe never to be changed again. Creation screams out in an unfazed universe, where it's only meant to die, to rise again, and keep the wheel of entropy from ever stopping its motion. And even so, in the same way, the galaxy is a spectacle for stoicism, heroism, and selfless altruism, a crucible of immense pressure and anguish, for stories to be cast into the hellish fires of war, where you can either make it out reforged a hero, or crumble into dust, scattered in vast millennia of history, to be forgotten forever. This is one of such stories. In the midst of battle, Malcourt the Sunless shouted the ancient words of his ancestors in the proper rites to issue a duel. He lifted his arms to the sky, invoking the spirits of his homeland, offering this bout as tribute in their honor. Then he fervently beat his chest while cussing ancient Fenrisian curses and hexes, locking his burning gaze on the enemy lines, his force field crackling at each burnt projectile fired his way, and finally, lowering his sword, the tip versed towards his chosen opponent. While initially both sides held off their warriors from intruding in their bout, Malcourt knew the nature of his enemy, and made sure to keep his honor guard close enough to intervene if things came to worse. Unexpectedly, however, the Lord of the Night, his opponent, had already been 2 steps ahead, crackling with warp energy. Airborne enemy reinforcements plummeted like ravenous birds in the Jarl's guard, holding them off for enough time to allow the enemy forces to dogpile over the isolated Lord of Winter, as the opposing challenger backed off into his warriors' midst. The traitors found themselves dumbfounded as Malcourt brandished his rage like only a son of Russ would know how, like the most lethal of battle focuses. Many would have expected anger to make a warrior clumsy, predictable, but not with the members of the 6th Legion. On the contrary, the blue-hot flames fanned by his foes' dishonorable conduct only sharpened Malcourt's already empowered senses and disciplined fighting skills. Like a blade showered in sparks on a grinding stone, the Lord of Winter came close to butchering an entire squad of legionaries, before a craven talon managed to claw away at his force field. Drenched in sweat, even through the support of his power pack, Malcourt the Sunless spun around, propelled by the blow that decapitated the upteenth legionary, bringing him to face the rest of his assailants. It was then that his hunter senses kicked in, his instinct transporting him to a different place, in search of old teachings, mastered in another time, in another land. His mind recollected that many carnivores on Fenris are notorious ambush killers. A key component of their hunting strategy is to consume the least amount of energy possible during the hunt, so that by consuming their prey, they can end the day in a caloric surplus, building a decent amount of fat to shield themselves from the harsh temperatures. Malcourt remembered all of this, one of just many lessons you had to learn if you wanted to survive on Fenris's frozen tundra. And on the battlefield, being ambushed by an invisible foe or by an invisible predator made no difference to him. All of them go for the throat. With a sudden dash to his right, Malcourt avoided the invisible blade thrusting for his neck. The invisibility shield of the Lord of Night wore off mid-swing. With a half-twirl, he repositioned himself beside the traitor, gripping the armed hand in an attempt to disarm him, the adrenaline of combat drawing a prideful smirk on his face. But here is where the crucible of war made its verdict, shaping the weave of fate for creation to witness, where it decided that the story of Malcourt the Sunless had met its end, and the story of Elethar the Grey found its beginning. Against all expectations, against all his experience, skill, and strength, a scenario he had played over and over in many bouts, the Jarl couldn't break the grip of the Lord of the Night, who turned to him with a wide grin. In a flash too late, Malcourt realized magic. Physically incapable to knock the weapon out of his opponent's grasp by nefarious magical means, the Jarl had left himself open, and thus the damned blade ruptured the Wolf Lord's chest plate, his mouth releasing a single clogged cough as the air escaped from his exposed lungs, filling with blood. It quickly twisted and twirled, widening the gash before slithering away in a fluid motion, as the now wounded warrior reached with a wide blow in an attempt at retaliation. Malcourt fell to his knees, a hand brought to the gash carved into his chest. His forces faded away. The Lord of Night knelt on him, smiling, as he drove his sword through him again, this time through his neck. Malcourt, whose mouth was now completely clogged by his own blood, began to slowly drown, whilst the sword sipped and drank fully of each drop of crimson, each drop of energy, and each drop of will. Blinded by a white-hot rage at the macabre spectacle, Elethar, part of Malcourt's honor guard, managed to disengage from his enclosed fight, smashing his left fist into the opponent's helmet in a surprise attack, crushing his optics and temporarily blinding him. In one huge, rage-filled lunge, Elethar capitalized on the warlord's bloodletting distraction, severing the arm holding the cursed blade from his body. Disarmed and wailing in pain, the Lord of Night retreated and immediately started reassessing the battle's ill development, as his minions interposed between him and the maddened Elethar. The wolves, enraged by the death of their leader, were now fighting with the momentum of tenfold their numbers, and were steadfast in their attempts to reach his position. Meanwhile, his warriors' units dwindled, starting to defect from the battlefield. Left with no other choice, the Lord of Night called the retreat, as the surviving warriors shielded him from the Vilka Fenrika's assault. With his lord's few surviving breaths to witness, Elethar knelt over him, and he vowed that he would avenge his memory, that the band of traitors that followed his killer would too meet the same fate by his hand, and that to put his vow to rest, he would use the same blade that had struck him down. It was in such way that Elethar came into possession of Sirgrimril, the Heartseater, and with the blade's passing, so did the title of Jarl. The daemonic artifact granted his possessor part of the strength of whom it previously slain. But if left unquenched, it would start to slowly feed off the owner's own energies. Hence Elethar's newly acquired moniker, unwilling to take part of the malicious machinations of the sword. His skin was permanently turned to a very dull grey, together with his thick beard and mane. Only rituals performed by the rune priests of the chapter can return him to his former strength, but it is a process to be repeated on a cyclical basis, as the Jarl remains adamant in his refusal of giving the demonic sword any type of satisfaction. In his mind, the only satisfaction that really matters is his own, and that is why the only heart the sword will ever feed from is the one of his lord's killer. Where this mission would lead Elethar, few dared to ever guess, and even fewer would tell so to his face. In the infinite vastness of the dark future of the 41st millennium, fate is a fickle thing, and unbeknownst to its own protagonists, it draws its own conclusions and its own lessons. For Elethar was destined to never find his prey, slain in some far-flung, obscure battlefield on the fringes of the galaxy by an equally unnoteworthy killer. A little theater lost to history, not even a smudge in the infinite canvas of war. But even so, even with this notion, Elethar would have never stopped searching. He would have never stopped fighting. His vow was more important to him than anything else in his life. Maybe to a fault, maybe to his own detriment. A life wasted, upholding some words professed to a corpse. But that was the wolves' way. Loyalty, honor, they were their own reward. Something that few could really comprehend.
Life is temporary, fleeting like flames, dimming from flickering tongues to smoldering embers, to charred cold ashes. Honor is immutable, unchanging like ice. You can break it, you can turn it into water, but eventually it'll go back to its form. When the fires of civilization will have gone out to the winds of war, only the echoes of our deeds is what will be left of us. At the end of the world, at the end of all things, only ice will remain.